Hey everybody, Tony D with another hot take. This one is on, well, for lack of a better term, popularity and how it hurts, I guess you would say, franchises in pop culture. Here's the problem. When you make a movie or a TV show and it becomes a hit, the first thing the studios are going to do is they're going to analyze why the thing is a hit. And, big hit movies and TV shows, they're obsessed over. Usually the stars are obsessed over. The celebrities, they shoot into popularity. If you look at like Stranger Things, right? What's his name? David Harbour. He has like his stars just through the roof for some reason. Probably because he was new. He was introduced on the show. This was his big, moment. I'm sure he was in stuff before, but I'm saying this made him a star, a big enough star that he's being tapped. He's in the new Black Widow movie. He was Hellboy. They want him because he's in the hottest TV show on Netflix, Stranger Things, and even though Winona Ryder was in that too, and to some extent that just sort of restarted her career, which is a little different than being new. They're not going to necessarily tap Winona because people kind of already know her. She's been in stuff. It's definitely helped her career, no doubt. But they're tapping David Harbour and all the kids from Stranger Things because the show is hot. But the reason it ruins shows and movie franchises and whatever is because almost immediately you start to see a distortion take place. So once you've established who the stars are, they are now crucial to the show. But from a creative story standpoint, they may not be crucial to your story. It may be better from a story standpoint to get rid of the characters that they're playing. So, give you an example. Peter Dinklage in Game of Thrones. His character, Tyrion, in the books, after Tyrion, spoilers, kills his father, he is done. He takes off and goes to, I want to say, the kingdom of the snake people, those guys. I think he goes there, he lives there, and he's out of the books. He's done. Because his story was done. And that's true. His story was over. From that moment forward, Tyrion being in Game of Thrones wasn't nearly as important. It was all, his entire character arc was about his father and his family. Had nothing to do with the eventual fate of Westeros. Had everything to do with his father. And that, from a creative standpoint, he should have been gone. But Peter Dinklage was hot stuff on Game of Thrones. Everybody liked him. He was iconic in his own way because of his stature. People wanted to see him. They weren't going to get rid of him. That's a TV move. That's a producer TV move. No, we can't get rid of Tyrion. We have to write him back in. We have to keep him in the show. So I think there were a few other characters who should have been dead or should have left that were kept in like that. And that's why, in my opinion, Game of Thrones became more like regular TV as the series grinded on. They ran out of road for the books about 3.5 seasons in, and then they got into trouble. They sort of kept up with killing off people because that had been the pattern of the show. But really, after you lost Stannis, none of the major characters were going to leave until the very end. So, the popularity, the fame distorts things, and it's not just with actors. It can be with the entire franchise itself. So with X Files was, in my view, proceeding with a great pace, and it was changing. Right? It had been initially, the show was episodic, and it was all about, it was kind of like Tales from the Crypt meets the FBI in a lot of ways, because they would have individual stories. Weird stuff would happen, but they would be relatively self-contained stories. And then the overarching story was Mulder's sister's kidnapping by aliens, we assume. And as the series progressed and got late in the series, I forget which season it was, but there was a season in which the alien story, which you assumed was going to tie into Mulder's sister, was going to take off big time. And I remember the season finale being the aliens with the sewn-in eyes, and they had these weird staves, and it all tied into the black oil. And it looked like this crazy cliffhanger where next year they were going to like blow the alien thing wide open, and the entire series was going to change. So it was going to stop being the X-Files as you knew it, and was going to be more about, the world fighting this alien invasion led by Mulder and Scully. They didn't go in that direction. Not really. You could argue that they kind of did, but they sort of pulled back from it and tried to go back to episodics. And it was true that the stars of the show were then in such demand that they were asking for more money, and they were eventually replaced. And then they really couldn't do the show. So imagine you're writing a book, a successful book series, and you're 6 or 7 books into it, and they come to you on the 8th book and say, well, you have to replace the main characters. We want you to do the same story, but just replace the main characters with some other people who do the same thing. Your readers would be like, why are you replacing this guy? Of course, there's no reason to do it in prose. That's the weakness of television and movies. You have to pay the actors. And it's not that the actors are greedy. Absolutely not. I'm not implying that in any way. Actors, they're very poor. Many of them don't make money. They end up going back to work, or, they struggle for decades, literally decades, and they hardly make anything. And it's a shame. But when you hit it as an actor, you have to make the money you can. And personally, if I was an actor on a hit show, I would ride that thing until the show was done. That's my personal thing. Now, would I ask for more money? Of course I would. But I wouldn't let it stop me from being on the show. But, negotiations can go awry. And, your agent can ask for too much, and they could just say, F this guy, we're going to replace you. It's also, too, that sometimes they don't like to work with you. So popularity really can ruin franchises. It's definitely ruined the big ones, I think. Star Wars, Star Trek, James Bond, all the big giant ones. There's too much money at stake. The studios won't leave it alone. That's why you had, back in the day, you had James Bond, you had the companies making James Bond, and one owned James Bond, the other owned Spectre. And the guys who owned James Bond said, see you later. And then they went ahead and made James Bond without the other company, because they're a company and they wanted to make more money. From a creative standpoint, that's a disaster. James Bond without Spectre, that's a problem. But what can you do? I mean, that's what happens to these amazing franchises. They become degraded over the years. It's what's happened to, in my view, Marvel and DC. You're stuck sort of running the same treadmill over and over and over with the same characters. the new characters don't really stand a chance. So even if you were creating good new characters, it's very difficult to push them to the forefront when you always have Batman to fall back on, or Spider-Man, or whoever. So, although I think the new characters coming out of these corporate comic book companies are horrifically bad, mostly because they don't rely on their creators to make them. And companies would rather they make more money on the trademarks that they own outright. They've signed deals where they don't own the trademark outright. Well, they'll own the trademark outright, but they got to pay royalties. So from a businessman's perspective, do you want to keep promoting the characters where you make all the money, or do you promote the characters where you have to pay royalties every time you use them? Well, it's really not much of a choice. You go with the non-royalty thing, and they're more popular anyway. So it's a tough call. There's really no solution for it. From a libertarian perspective, the solution would be to get rid of copyrights and trademarks and patents. These things distort the marketplace, but you could argue, well, this gives the inventor or creator some amount of protection so they can make money for a time, so that people just don't come along and steal it. Yeah, that's true. Perhaps there should be some temporary, short-term copyright or patent. Originally the copyright was 50 years. And that seemed like a reasonable amount of time. You made your money over 50 years. It's practically a lifetime for most people, figuring that you don't really start creating something until you're, in your 20s. And, at 50 years, it goes into the public domain, and then, it becomes part of the zeitgeist. Anybody can use it. Unfortunately, the corporations, they pushed the governments into extending that, first to 75 years, and now I think it's even further for some certain select cases, which is a shame because, you can also copyright and trademark things that are new versions of old things. So the Mighty Thor at Marvel Comics, obviously they can't trademark Thor. Thor is a Nordic god who's in the public domain. But they can copyright the Mighty Thor, Jack Kirby's, I believe it was Jack Kirby, his look, his personality. We all know who the Mighty Thor is. But plenty of other comic book companies have done their own version of Thor. You may or may not know this, but they can't be called the Mighty Thor, and they can't be blonde with that, chest plate, that iconic chest plate that the Marvel's Thor has. And people go out of their way to make sure that that's the case. They make different kinds of Thor. Typically they make Thor with red hair, because I believe that's closer to the actual myth. I remember back in the day, Kimiko did their own version of Thor, the Elementals, for anybody who used to read that. But in the short term, there's really no way to fix it. You have to rely on the creators and the producers of this stuff to do so. So if you look at Back to the Future, Robert Zemeckis and his cohorts signed a contract that said they wouldn't reboot the franchise, especially without the stars. So that's a good thing. So we have that frozen in amber, and hopefully no one's going to come along. Now, maybe after everybody's dead and the studio can, do some legal maneuvering, they can go back and redo their own version of Back to the Future. Updated, of course. But most things should end, especially when you're looking at the barrel of 40 or 50 years, even 70 to 90 years in the case of comic books, because, Superman is so iconic and so part of our culture now. he really should be in the public domain. Everybody should be able to do their own version of Superman. He's iconic and part of our culture. Once you're part of the culture, obviously, like, you look at things like The Sopranos, another show which I felt got ruined towards the end of its run. The fame kind of ruined it, and that was a little bit of everything. It was like it was too famous. Everybody was watching it. The producers felt more and more pressure to do certain things, to front certain characters. It hurt a lot that the lead actress, one of the lead actresses, died. But you had situations where you had some of the actors singing on the show and doing things that, in my view, wasn't very mafia-like. And then towards the end, it almost went into mafia overdrive as all the actors seemingly wanted to do a death scene. And the ending was a lot like Game of Thrones, and that was a little unsatisfying because I think the producers wanted to keep the door open in case they wanted to come back to do a Sopranos movie or a reunion show or whatever their plans were. So overall, I would say, with regards to fame, you have to be careful what you wish for, fanboys. I said that back in the day when people talked about, oh, wouldn't it be great if they made Marvel movies? It was great for a while. Now I think you're going to see Phase 4 and you're going to say, oh, no, why? Why are you ruining this? Just my opinion for the sense of it. You look at the DC movies and you just think, oh, man, why can't they get this right? And again, it's partly the movies, partly the trend of superhero movies, the fame of the people in those movies, have distorted it. Amber Heard may not be in the new Aquaman movie or have her role severely reduced because of her in real life behavior regarding Johnny Depp. These things have nothing to do with the creative story. Maybe they'll replace her. Which, can work, but fame is a fickle thing, and it really can destroy a lot of your favorite franchises. So, what you honestly want, the best situation, and I often said this to comic creators. If I worked at a comic book company, they'd say, well, what comic would you work on? What would be your first pick? And of course I would say, well, Batman, I love Batman. I'd love to write Batman. But I said, if from a career standpoint, the comic I would pick, this was years back, not now, would have been Wonder Woman. Because Wonder Woman was a character that DC Comics couldn't stop publishing. They couldn't stop. They needed Wonder Woman. But at the same time, nobody cared about Wonder Woman. So it was out there, but it was mostly ignored. So it has the support of the company, and so you just need to make it so it has the support of the fan base. Now it has more of a support, but for a long time, Wonder Woman was the book, like, oh yeah, they're still publishing Wonder Woman. It partly has to do with the creator's contract. They have to pay the estate of the creator a ridiculous amount of money if they ever stop publishing Wonder Woman, which is crazy. So I've heard. But, that to me would be a perfect book for me to work on because I could build up the audience. And for the most part, people will leave me alone for a long time to allow me to do that. Because you need that in terms of creativity. It needs to be popular enough so they won't cancel it, but not too popular so the studio goes, oh, this makes money. Oh, we got to make sure you're doing the right things. Even though the whole reason they're even talking to me is because I did the right things in order to build it up. But that's been the ongoing saga of the creatives versus the suits since time immemorial. Anyhow, that's my rant, such that it is. Beware of popularity, fanboys. It can get you into trouble.